The house smelled like roasted chicken and warm bread, the kind of smell that usually meant safety to me, the kind that once made me feel like no matter what happened outside these walls, this was where things stayed whole. That night, it did not feel like that at all. It felt staged, like a set dressed to look familiar while something sharp waited just out of sight. Dad and Mom's place in Columbus, Ohio was full in a way it rarely was anymore. Folding chairs lined the living room wall, coats were draped over the banister, and voices overlapped in polite bursts that never quite turned into real laughter. Nearly 30 people filled the house, family on both sides, and a handful of Leela's future in-laws, all dressed a little nicer than usual for a simple family gathering. It was supposed to be a pre-wedding dinner, nothing formal, just a chance for everyone to be in one place before the big day. I stood near the kitchen counter, my back resting against the cool edge of the granite, listening to the clink of plates and the low hum of conversation. Someone was talking about traffic. Someone else was arguing softly about whether it would rain next weekend. Lila moved through the room with the tight smile she had been practicing for months, the one that said she was excited and overwhelmed and trying very hard not to show either. Mom hovered near the dining table, adjusting napkins that were already straight. Adam paced with a drink in his hand, nodding along to conversations without really being part of them. I remember thinking how strange it was that everything looked right. The house was clean, the lights warm, the food nearly ready. If I had walked in from the outside, with no history, no memory, I would have thought this was a happy moment. I would not have known that my shoulders were tense for reasons I could not fully explain, or that a quiet pressure had been building behind my eyes since the moment I parked my car on their street. I had come early to help, like I always did. I chopped vegetables, carried trays, and refilled glasses. I kept myself useful because being useful had always been the safest way to exist in my family. If I stayed busy, no one asked questions. If I stayed helpful, no one looked too closely at me. I told myself this was just an old habit, nothing more. As you listen to this, I am curious what you are doing right now. Are you sitting at your kitchen table with a cup of coffee, or folding laundry, or driving somewhere familiar on a quiet road? For me, when all of this happened, I was standing right there by the kitchen counter, holding a clean dish towel, feeling that odd sense of waiting without knowing what I was waiting for. Dad's voice cut through the room when he tapped his glass with a spoon. It was not loud, just enough to draw attention. Conversations tapered off in waves. The chairs shifted. Someone cleared their throat. I looked up, expecting him to announce dinner or make a toast about how proud he was of Lila. That would have made sense. That would have fit the evening. Dad smiled, the tight, polite smile he used when he thought he was being reasonable. He thanked everyone for coming, for making the time, and for supporting the family. He talked about how important it was to protect special moments, to keep things positive, to do what was best for everyone involved. As he spoke, I felt my stomach tighten, though I still did not know why. Then he said my name. Not softly, not kindly, just my name, clear and deliberate, so that every face in the room turned toward me at once. I remember the sudden heat in my cheeks, the way the dish towel slipped a little in my hands. Dad said that after a lot of thought, he and Mom had made a decision. He said it was not easy, but it was necessary. He said that for the sake of harmony, for the sake of Leela's happiness, certain boundaries needed to be set. He said I would not be attending her wedding. For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard him. The words did not land right away. They floated in the air, disconnected from meaning, like a sentence in a foreign language. David kept talking, explaining, filling the space before I could say anything. He said I was not important enough to be there. He said my past choices, especially the broken engagement, had brought too much negativity. He said weddings were about good energy, about starting fresh, and my presence would only remind people of what had gone wrong before. He said this was not punishment. He said it was simply what was best for the family. The room went silent in a way I had never experienced before. Not the comfortable quiet of people listening, but a heavy vacuum where sound seemed afraid to exist. No one laughed. No one protested. No one even shifted uncomfortably. I looked at Mom. She stared down at the napkin in her hands, twisting it tighter and tighter until her knuckles went pale. She did not look up. I looked at Leela. She stood frozen near the doorway, her face drained of color, her eyes fixed on a spot on the floor just in front of her shoes. She did not meet my gaze. I looked at my aunts and uncles, at cousins I had grown up with, at people who had hugged me hello less than an hour earlier. A few of them glanced away when they saw me looking. One woman pressed her lips together as if she might say something, then didn't. No one asked if I was okay. No one said this was unfair. No one said Dad was wrong. My body reacted before my mind caught up. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. There was a faint ringing in my ears, like I had stood up too fast. My hands felt strangely light, as if they no longer belonged to me. I waited for tears, for heat, for anger to explode out of me the way it does in movies. None of that happened. Instead, I felt empty. Not numb exactly, but hollowed out, as if something had finally given up after holding on for too long. David finished speaking and took a sip of his drink, satisfied, as though he had just explained a reasonable house rule. The silence stretched. It became unbearable. That was when I realized something very simple and very clear. No one in that room was going to speak for me. Not now. Not ever. I stepped away from the counter. The sound of my shoes against the hardwood floor seemed too loud, like a disruption. Every eye followed me as I moved into the center of the room. I could feel my pulse in my temples, but my thoughts were steady in a way they had never been before. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I did not unlock it right away. I just held it in my hand, feeling its weight, grounding myself in something solid and real. I looked at Dad first. He frowned, confused, as if he had not expected me to move at all. Then I looked at Mom, then at Leela. Then, one by one, I let my eyes pass over every person who had chosen silence. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. It did not shake. I did not raise it. I did not rush. I said exactly 10 words. Who wants to tell her I paid for the wedding? No one breathed. The air in the room changed instantly, like a window had been thrown open in the middle of winter. David's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Mom's head snapped up, her eyes wide. Lila looked at me then. Really looked at me, and I saw something flicker across her face that looked a lot like fear. Still, no one spoke. I stood there, phone in hand, surrounded by people who suddenly understood that this was not over. Not even close. The silence did not break right away. It stretched, thick and uncomfortable, until it felt like it was pressing against my chest. I could hear small sounds I had never noticed before. The low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. The faint clink of someone setting a glass down too hard. The tick of the old clock on the wall that Mom had insisted on keeping even, after it stopped matching the rest of the house. Dad finally shifted his weight. His brows pulled together, not in guilt, but in irritation, like he was annoyed that the evening was no longer following the script he had written in his head. He let out a short breath through his nose, the kind he used when he thought someone was being dramatic. That is not what we are talking about right now, he said. His voice was sharper than before, edged with warning. I did not answer him. I was still standing there, phone resting in my palm, my fingers wrapped around it a little tighter than necessary. I realized, distantly, that my hands were no longer shaken. My body had settled into something solid and grounded, like it finally understood what my mind had been trying to accept for years. Mom took a small step toward me, then stopped. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Athena, she said quietly, the way she used to when I was a child and she was trying to calm a situation, without actually taking sides. You do not need to do this. Do what exactly? I thought. But I did not say it out loud. Do I need to stand here and absorb being erased? Do I need to smile and make everyone comfortable? Do I need to keep pretending that I am fine with being treated like something disposable? Lila finally lifted her head. Our eyes met for the first time since Dad spoke. Her expression was tight, her lips pressed together, her hands clenched at her sides. She looked scared, but not for me. I could see it clearly now. She was scared of what might happen to her wedding, to her plans, to the picture she had built so carefully in her mind. Athena, she whispered, as if saying my name softly might undo what had already been said. I held her gaze. I wanted her to say something else. I wanted her to say that Dad was wrong, that this was cruel, that she would not accept a celebration built on my exclusion. She did not. Her eyes flicked past me, toward Mom, toward Dad, searching for direction. That was when it truly sank in. This moment was not a misunderstanding. It was a choice. Someone near the couch cleared their throat. Another person shifted in their chair. A few people began to look at their phones, suddenly very interested in their screens. The silence had become unbearable, so people tried to escape it in small, cowardly ways. Dad straightened his shoulders. He looked around the room, clearly trying to regain control. He said something about not airing private matters in public. He said something about respect. He said something about how I was overreacting. The words washed over me without sticking. For the first time, I was not trying to make sense of him. I was simply watching him, the way you watch someone reveal who they have always been. My feelings. To keep the peace. How many holidays I had rearranged my plans to fit everyone else's comfort. How many apologies I had made for things that were never actually wrong. I thought about the younger version of myself, who believed that if I tried hard enough, if I stayed kind enough, if I proved my worth in quiet, useful ways, I would eventually be chosen. Standing there, with nearly 30 people watching, I finally understood that moment was never coming. Dad took another step toward me. "Athena, put the phone away," he said, his voice low and firm, the voice of someone used to being obeyed. I met his eyes. There was no anger in me now, no need to argue. Just clarity. I realized that whatever happened next was already set in motion. The truth had been spoken out loud, and there was no folding it neatly back into silence. I glanced down at my phone, not to make a call yet, but to remind myself that I was not trapped, that I had options, that I was not powerless in this room, no matter how much Dad wanted me to feel that way. Around us, the house felt different. The warmth was gone. The air felt thin. Exposed. People were starting to understand that they were not just witnesses to an awkward family moment. They were standing at the edge of something that was about to change. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. I did not know exactly how the rest of the night would unfold. I did not know who would still be standing with me when it was over. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done shrinking. I looked up again, taking in the faces around me, memorizing this moment. The discomfort, the fear, the sudden awareness that words have consequences. Then I stopped talking altogether. I did not explain myself. I did not defend my choices. I simply stood there, phone in hand, letting the silence do the work for me. That silence stayed with me as I drove home later that night, sitting in the passenger seat of my own thoughts long after the house lights faded in the rearview mirror. I did not turn on the radio. I did not call anyone. I just let the quiet wrap around me because it felt familiar in a way that was almost comforting. Silence has always been where I learned to survive. I was raised to be the one who understood, the one who adjusted, the one who smoothed things over before they turned sharp. As the oldest daughter, that role was not spoken out loud, but it was taught in 1,000 small ways. When my brother spilled something and cried, I was told to help clean it up. When Lila got overwhelmed, I was reminded that I was strong enough for both of us. When Mom looked tired, I stepped in. When Dad was frustrated, I stayed out of the way. I learned early that harmony mattered more than honesty, and that keeping everyone else comfortable was the fastest way to earn love. I did not question it for a long time. It felt like responsibility. It felt like it was needed. And for years, I wore that role proudly, even when it cut into me in ways I did not know how to name yet. By the time I met Caleb Monroe, I was already good at being agreeable. Caleb came into my life quietly, through mutual friends, with a smile that made people feel chosen. He was steady, reliable, the kind of man my family immediately approved of. He held doors open. He showed up on time. He talked about the future in careful, practical terms. David liked him right away. Mom called him a blessing. When Caleb proposed, everyone celebrated like a problem had finally been solved. I was in my late 20s, settled in my career, and apparently right on schedule. The ring was modest, tasteful, exactly the kind of ring people expected me to wear. I remember standing in Mom's kitchen while she cried happy tears and told me how proud she was David clapped Caleb on the shoulder and joked about finally getting another son. Planning the wedding became a family project almost overnight. Guest lists were debated. Venues were toured. Colors were chosen. I smiled through all of it. Even when it felt like the wedding was happening around me instead of with me, I told myself that was normal, that this was just how these things went. It was only a few weeks before the wedding when the truth cracked through all that careful planning. I found the messages by accident, a name I did not recognize lighting up Caleb's phone while he was in the show. Shower. At first, I tried to explain it away. I told myself not to snoop. I told myself I was being paranoid. But the words were too clear, too familiar. The tone was intimate in a way that left no room for doubt. My hands shook as I scrolled, my stomach dropping lower with every line. There was no single dramatic confession, no obvious betrayal scene. Just a pattern of lies that had been quietly growing behind my back. When Caleb came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, I was sitting on the edge of the bed holding his phone. He stopped short when he saw my face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he tried to explain. He said it was complicated. He said it did not mean anything. He said I was blowing it out of proportion. I remember feeling strangely calm as I listened, like my body had already made a decision before my mind caught up. I told him the wedding was off. I said it plainly, not as a threat, not as a test, just as a fact. Caleb stared at me like I had lost my mind. He asked me to reconsider. He reminded me how close the date was. He told me how embarrassed he would be. He told me how much money had already been spent. I told him I could not marry someone who lied to me. That was the entire explanation. Breaking off the engagement should have been the hardest part. It was not. The hardest part was telling my family. Mom cried, but not the way I expected. She cried about the invitations that had already been mailed, about the deposits, about what people would say. She asked me why I could not just work it out privately. She asked me why I needed to make it so public. Dad was angry in a way I had rarely seen. He paced the living room, his voice rising with every sentence. He talked about commitment, about promises, about how relationships required compromise. He told me everyone made mistakes. He asked me if I really thought starting over would be easier. I waited for someone to ask how I felt. No one did. Relative called with advice that sounded a lot like criticism. They told me marriage was not about happiness. They told me forgiveness was a virtue. They told me I was being dramatic, impulsive, selfish. A few people asked if I was sure, as if certainty was the problem. When I explained what Caleb had done, the details seemed to slide right past them. It was as if his actions mattered less than my reaction. The betrayal became background noise, while my decision took center stage. The wedding was officially canceled. Gifts were returned. Plans were unraveled. And somewhere in the middle of all that, a story began to form that had very little to do with what actually happened. I was labeled difficult, emotional, unstable. People said I had thrown everything away over nothing. Someone joked that I had cold feet. Another person said, I probably just was not ready. David said the words that stayed with me longer than any others. He said I had ruined something beautiful. He said if I had already broken one wedding, I should stay far away from the next one. He did not raise his voice when he said it. He said it calmly, like a warning, like advice meant to help me avoid further damage. After that, things changed in subtle ways. Invitations became fewer. Conversations shifted when I entered the room. When Leela started dating seriously, there was an unspoken understanding that I was not to interfere, not to comment, not to bring my energy into it. I internalized all of it more deeply than I realized. I began to believe that maybe I had been wrong. Maybe I should have tried harder. That maybe protecting myself had been a kind of failure. So when Leela announced her engagement, I did not hesitate to offer help. I volunteered my time. I offered my resources. I stayed in the background and told myself that was where I belonged. I thought if I supported her enough, if I proved I could be generous and invisible at the same time, I might earn my way back into the family's good graces. I thought that by paying for what I had once taken away, I could balance the scales. Standing in my driveway that night, engine still running, I realized how long I had been living with that belief, that I owed something, that I needed to make up for choosing myself. I turned off the car and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, the weight of that realization settling into me. I had spent years trying to atone for a decision that had saved me, and somehow, without ever saying it out loud, my family had taught me that this was the price of my freedom. That belief followed me into the years that came after. It settled into my routines, my decisions, the way I measured my worth, without realizing I was doing it. I poured myself into work because work made sense. Work had rules. Work rewarded effort. In the hospitality industry, there was no room for emotional guessing games. Either something ran smoothly or it did not. Either you showed up prepared or you did not. I learned to take comfort in that clarity. I moved up steadily, not because I chased titles, but because I was dependable. I showed up early, I stayed late. I learned how to solve problems quietly, before they became disasters. Eventually, I became an operations manager, overseeing multiple locations, juggling schedules, budgets, staff issues, supply shortages, and guest complaints with a calm that surprised even me. My income stabilized. My life has been simplified. I lived within my means, paid my bills on time, and saved carefully. There was no flash to it, no grand gestures, just consistency. That consistency became part of my identity. I was the reliable one, the one who could be counted on when things needed to get done. And slowly, without anyone saying it directly, that identity bled back into my role in the family. When Leela called to tell me she was engaged, I felt a rush of complicated emotions all at once. I was happy for her, genuinely. I loved my sister, but there was also a familiar tightening in my chest, a quiet warning I had learned not to ignore. Weddings did not belong to me anymore. They were spaces I had been gently but firmly pushed out of. Mom cried when she told me. Happy tears this time. She talked about how beautiful the ring was, how kind Lila's fiancé seemed, how everything felt right. Dad was more reserved, but I could hear the relief in his voice when he spoke about it. Another chance. A clean slate, a wedding that would not be tainted by past mistakes. No one asked me how I felt about it. I did not expect them to. The conversation shifted quickly to logistics, dates, venues, guest lists, cost. That was when Mom hesitated, then said what had clearly been rehearsed. She said she and Dad had been talking. She said weddings were expensive. She said they were already stretched thin. Then she said it carefully, like she was asking a favor rather than delivering a judgment. She said maybe this was my chance to help, to make things right, to contribute in a meaningful way. Dad did not soften it the same way. He said I had already ruined one wedding. He said this was an opportunity to balance things, to show support, to prove that I was not a bad omen. Those words landed quietly but heavily. I remember staring at my phone after the call ended, sitting on my couch, the afternoon light slanting through the window. I felt the old reflex kick in immediately, the urge to fix, too smooth, to make myself useful. I told myself I was doing it for Leela, and that was true, at least partly. I did want her to have a beautiful day. I wanted to be generous. I wanted to show up for her in the ways no one had shown up for me. But there was another truth layered underneath that one. I wanted to prove something. I wanted to prove that I was not cursed, that my presence did not bring things crashing down, that I could touch a wedding without destroying it. So I said yes. Once I said yes, things moved quickly. Lila was relieved. Mom was grateful. David was satisfied in a way that felt transactional rather than emotional. The unspoken agreement was clear. I would contribute, quietly and efficiently, and in return, I would stay out of the spotlight. We met with Nora Feldman, the wedding planner Mom had researched extensively. Nora was professional, organized, and brisk, in the way of someone who had seen every possible wedding disaster and learned not to take any of it personally. She laid out options, timelines, contracts. She asked practical questions. She did not ask about family dynamics. When it came time to sign paperwork, Nora looked at me. She asked whose name should go on the contracts. Mom glanced at Dad. Dad looked at me. It was assumed I was the one paying. My name went on the line. I signed without hesitation. We toured venues together, Lila and Mom and me. Riverside Hall stood out immediately. It was elegant without being showy, set near the river with tall windows that let in soft, natural light. Lila loved it. Mom clasped her hands together and said it felt right. Dad nodded, already calculating costs in his head. The deposit was substantial. I transferred the funds without comment. I booked catering. I paid for the dress Lila fell in love with, the one she said made her feel like herself, but better. Each payment felt like another brick laid in a wall I was building around them. Idea that this time, things would be different. As plans came together, my role remained clear. I was involved, but not visible. I attended meetings, I approved invoices, I solved problems behind the scenes. I did not offer opinions unless asked. I did not suggest changes unless something truly needed adjusting. I stayed careful. I stayed quiet. Sometimes, in moments of honesty with myself, I wondered if I was being punished or if I was volunteering for the role. The line blurred more than I liked to admit. There were small moments that should have warned me. Comments from relatives about how generous I was, followed by reminders to stay out of the way. Jokes about how lucky Leela was to have a sister like me, paired with sideways looks that suggested I was making up for something. Once, Mom said it outright, though she probably did not mean it to cut the way it did. She told me it was good that I was contributing so much. She said it showed growth. It showed accountability. I nodded and said nothing. The day I signed the final contract with Nora stands out in my memory more clearly than any other. I sat at a small table in her office, sunlight streaming through the window. Paperwork spread neatly in front of me. Nora walked me through each page, explaining timelines, cancellation clauses, contingencies. As she talked, I listened carefully, my professional instincts fully engaged. This was familiar territory. Contracts, responsibilities, clear expectations. I initiated where I was told. I signed where indicated. When it was done, Nora slid the folder toward me and smiled. She said everything was set. She said it was going to be a beautiful wedding. I remember holding the pen for a moment longer than necessary after she finished speaking. There was a strange sense of finality in that room, a feeling I could not quite place. I told myself it was just nerves, just the weight of responsibility. As I stood up to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass door. I looked composed, capable, useful. I told myself that this was the role I was meant to play now. At least this time, I would not be the problem. I did not know then how fragile that belief was, or how quickly it would be tested. I did not know that by trying so hard to prove my worth, I had placed myself in a position where I would eventually have to choose between my dignity and my silence. All I knew in that moment was that I had done what was asked of me. I had paid my way back into the story, and I hoped, quietly and foolishly, that it would be enough. The moment after I spoke those 10 words did not explode the way people imagine confrontation does. There was no shouting, no chaos, no dramatic reaction that made it easy to decide who was right and who was wrong. Instead, the room filled with a silence so thick it felt deliberate, like everyone had silently agreed to stop moving at the same time. I stayed where I was, standing near the center of the living room, my phone still resting in my hand. I did not look at it. I did not unlock it. I simply held it there, a quiet reminder of something no one wanted to acknowledge out loud. I watched the people around me the way you watch a slow-moving storm, not for lightning, but for signs of pressure building beneath the surface. Mom was the first one I looked at. She had lifted her head when I spoke, eyes wide for just a second. Then she dropped her gaze again. Her fingers tightened around the cloth napkin until the fabric twisted and folded in on itself. She did not say my name. She did not say anything at all. Her silence was careful, almost practiced, as if she had learned over years that saying nothing was safer than saying the wrong thing. Dad stood rigid near the end of the table, his jaw clenched, the muscles in his face pulling tight as he stared at me. I could tell he was holding something back, measuring his words, decision whether to assert control or wait for the moment to pass. He did not look surprised. If anything, he looked inconvenienced, like I had disrupted a plan he assumed would go unchallenged. Lila remained near the doorway, her arms hanging stiffly at her sides. She stared at the floor as though the hardwood held answers she could not face, in my direction. I knew she understood exactly what I had said. She had watched me sign the checks. She thanked me for the dress. She had hugged me after meetings with the planner. None of this was new information to her. And still, she said nothing. I let my eyes move slowly across the room. My Aunt June sat on the edge of the couch, her posture tense, hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked at me, then at Mom, then back at me again. Her lips parted slightly, like she was about to speak, like she might say something simple and honest that could have shifted the balance of the room. Then Mom shook her head, just barely. The smallest movement, almost invisible unless you were watching closely. June closed her mouth and looked down at her hands. That was the moment that hurt the most. It was not Dad declaring I did not belong. I had lived with his disapproval long enough to recognize it for what it was. It was not even Leela staying silent, though that cut deeper than I expected. It was the collective decision, made without discussion, that letting this happen was easier than stopping it. No one challenged the idea that I was not important enough. No one questioned why my past choices were still being used against me. No one asked why paying for a wedding apparently did not earn a seat at it. The room accepted the story Dad had told because it required nothing of them. I realized then how often silence is mistaken for neutrality. How often people convince themselves they are not choosing sides when they absolutely are. Someone near the back of the room cleared their throat. Another person shifted their weight, the legs of a chair scraping softly against the floor. Small movements, quiet escapes. People looked at the food, at the walls, at anything but me. The discomfort was shared, but the responsibility was not. I felt something change inside me, slow and steady. The sharp sting of humiliation began to dull, replaced by a strange clarity. This was not a misunderstanding that needed correcting. It was not a moment that would be smoothed over with the right explanation. This was the natural result of years of being convenient. David finally spoke again, though his voice was lower now, controlled. He said we would talk about this later. He said tonight was not the time. He said we did not need to make a scene. The words were meant to put me back in my place, to suggest that my response was the problem, not the statement that had provoked it. I nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. I did not argue. I did not explain myself. There was nothing left to explain. Mom took a step toward me again, her expression tight with worry. She reached out as if to touch my arm, then hesitated, her hand falling back to her side. She looked tired. Not sad for me, but tired of conflict, tired of disruption. I recognized that look. I had worn it myself for years. Lila finally lifted her head, her eyes meeting mine for the briefest moment. There was something in her expression then, something like guilt or fear, or maybe both. She swallowed, as if she might say something, then looked away again. The moment passed. I took a slow breath. I felt grounded in a way I had not expected. The room had revealed itself fully now. There were no more questions to ask. No more assumptions to make. What surprised me most was how calm I felt. For years, I had told myself that if I ever stopped trying to keep the peace, everything would fall apart. That relationship would shatter, that I would be alone, standing there, surrounded by people who had already chosen their comfort over my dignity. I realized how little I actually had to lose. I did not move right away. I did not rush toward the door or retreat back into the kitchen. I stayed where I was, letting the silence stretch just a little longer. I wanted everyone in that room to feel it, to sit with it, to understand that pretending nothing had happened was no longer an option. Eventually, conversation began to stir again, hesitant and uneven. Someone asked if dinner was ready. Someone else commented on the weather. The normal sounds of a family gathering tried to reassert themselves, but they felt hollow now, disconnected from the truth that had just been laid bare. I stepped back toward the wall, giving myself space. I leaned against it and watched, no longer participating, no longer performing. I noticed details I had overlooked before. The way Dad's shoulders remained tense, the way Mom kept glancing at me, then away, the way Lila stayed close to her fiancé, as if proximity alone could protect her from consequences. I did not feel angry. I felt awake. That night marked the first time I truly understood that being accepted had always come with conditions, that my role had been carefully shaped to serve everyone else's comfort, and that the moment I stepped outside of it, the illusion of belonging disappeared. As the evening dragged on, that realization settled deeper into me. It was cold, yes, but it was also steady, clear. I could feel a different kind of resolve taking shape, one that did not rely on approval or permission. By the time I reached for my coat, I was no longer grieving what I had lost. I was beginning to understand what I had gained. A calm, quiet certainty replaced the ache in my chest, and with it came the knowledge that whatever happened next, I would not be shrinking myself to fit into a room that had already decided I did not belong. That clarity did something unexpected. It steadied me. The noise of the room faded into the background. Like static you stop noticing once you accept it is always there. I could still see everyone moving, talking quietly again, pretending the moment had passed. But inside me, something had already shifted into place. I took one step away from the wall and looked down at the phone still resting in my hand. For a second, I considered putting it back in my pocket. Not because I doubted myself, but because I knew exactly what was about to happen, and I wanted to be certain I was choosing it consciously. Not out of anger, not out of embarrassment, but out of self-respect. Dad was saying something to Mom in a low voice. I could see his jaw working, the way it always did when he felt challenged. Mom nodded along, her shoulders hunched slightly forward, already bracing for damage control. Lila stood frozen near her fiancé, her eyes flicking between me and the doorway, like she was hoping someone else would step in and fix this. No one did. So I unlocked my phone. The screen lit up my face for a moment, casting a pale glow that felt almost intimate in the middle of that crowded room. My hands were steady as I scrolled to my contacts. I did not announce what I was doing. I did not raise my voice. I simply turned slightly so everyone could see my screen and tapped the name, Rachel Boone. Rachel was the venue manager at Riverside Hall. We had spoken several times over the past months. She knew my voice. She knew my name. She knew the contract. I pressed the call button and then, deliberately, switched to the speaker. The ringing sound cut cleanly through the half-resumed chatter. Conversations stalled again. Heads turned. Even Dad stopped mid-sentence. Rachel answered on the third ring, her voice bright and professional. "Hi, Athena," she said, but because I wanted my voice to come out even. "Hi, Rachel. I am calling to confirm the remaining balance and payment schedule for the wedding at Riverside Hall." There was a brief pause on the line, the sound of typing. "Of course," she said. "The final payment is scheduled for next week. Is everything all right?" "Yes," I said, "and I need to let you know that I will not be authorizing any further payments at this time." The room went still again, but this time the silence felt different. It was alert now, charged. Rachel hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "Okay," she said carefully. "May I ask the reason?" "You can note that the client is requesting to pause the contract," I said. "Per the agreement, the account holder has the right to do so." Another pause. More typing. "Yes, Athena," she said. "That is correct. I will mark the contract as pending until further notice." "Thank you," I said. That is all I needed. I ended the call and let my arm fall back to my side. No one spoke. Mom stared at me like she had never seen me before. Dad took a sharp step forward, his face flushed. "Athena," he said, his voice low and urgent. "What are you doing?" I did not answer him. Not yet. Instead, I scrolled again and tapped Nora Feldman. Nora answered quickly, her tone brisk but friendly. "Athena, hi. I was just about to email you about the seating chart." "Hi, Nora," I said. "I need to put all services on hold, effective immediately." The sound that came from Dad then was somewhere between a scoff and a gasp. Mom reached for his arm, her eyes wide. Lila's face had gone pale. Nora did not react emotionally. She never did. She asked the question she was trained to ask. "May I ask what prompted the change?" I kept my voice calm. "The contracts are under my name," I said. "I am exercising my right to pause all planning and payments until further notice." There was the sound of papers shifting on Nora's end. She took a breath. "Athena," she said slowly, legally, "this is your call." Those words landed like a dropped glass. I felt them move through the room, changing the temperature instantly. David froze. Mom let out a small, broken sound. Lila covered her mouth with her hand. Nora continued, still professional. I will notify the vendors and suspend all services tied to your account. If you decide to move forward later, we can discuss next steps. Thank you, I said. I appreciate it. I ended the call. For a moment, no one reacted at all. It was as if the room had forgotten how to respond. Then everything happened at once. Dad raised his voice, demanding to know what I thought I was doing, accusing me of embarrassing the family, of sabotaging Leela's future. Mom started crying, telling me to stop, to think, to calm down. Someone from the couch whispered something under their breath. Lila took a step toward me, then stopped, her hands shaking. I stood there and listened without interrupting. What struck me most in that moment was not the anger or the panic, but the sudden shift in how I was being seen. Just minutes earlier, I had been someone they felt comfortable excluding. Now, I was someone they were afraid of upsetting. I had not raised my voice. I had not insulted anyone. I had not said a single cruel thing. I had simply acted within my rights. Dad pointed a finger at me, his face tight with fury. You are making a huge mistake, he said. This is not how families handle problems. I looked at him calmly. This is how contracts work, I said. The room buzzed with nervous energy. People began talking over each other. Questions flew. What about the deposits? What about the date? What about the guests? No one asked how I felt. No one asked why it had come to this. They were too busy scrambling to protect what they were about to lose. Mom grabbed my arm, her grip firm. Please, she said, her voice breaking. Not like this. I gently pulled my arm free. I am not yelling, I said quietly. I am not insulting anyone. I am simply choosing not to fund an event I am not welcome to attend. That sentence hung in the air, undeniable. Lila finally found her voice. Athena, she said, her eyes wide with fear. You cannot do this. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I already did. The truth settled in slowly for everyone else. This was not a bluff. This was not an emotional outburst that could be soothed and redirected. This was a boundary, clearly drawn. The atmosphere in the room shifted from stunned silence to raw anxiety. People whispered. Phones came out. Someone mentioned calling the venue directly. Someone else asked if this could be fixed quietly. I said nothing more. I did not need to. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and took a step toward the door. Feeling lighter with each movement, behind me, the room hummed with fear and confusion, the kind that comes when people realize the ground beneath them is not as solid as they believed. As I reached for my coat, I knew this day would be remembered differently by everyone who was there. For them, it was the moment everything started to fall apart. For me, it was the moment I stopped holding it together for everyone else. I opened the door and let the cool night air wash over me, pausing just long enough to breathe it in. Steady and real. Behind me, the voices rose again, sharper now, edged with urgency. I stepped outside and closed the door gently, leaving the sound behind me, knowing that what I had done could not be undone, and that the consequences were only just beginning to surface. The cold air hit my face like a reset. I stood on the porch for a moment, my hand still resting on the doorknob, listening to the muffled chaos inside. Voices overlapped now, sharper and louder than before. The calm silence I had created was gone, replaced by panic that spilled through the walls in uneven waves. I could hear Dad clearly, even through the door. His voice carried when he was angry. It always had. I did not move. I did not rush to my car. I stood there and let myself breathe, steady and slow, grounding myself in the reality of what I had chosen. For the first time that night, I felt fully present in my body, aware of my feet against the wood, the chill on my skin, the quiet strength settling into my chest. The door opened behind me. David stepped out onto the porch, his face flushed, his eyes hard. He did not bother lowering his voice. He told me I was destroying Leela's future. He said I was selfish. He said I was punishing everyone because I could not get over my past. Each word landed heavy, meant to bruise, means to push me back into the role I had always played. I listened without interrupting. I had spent my whole life listening. Mom followed him out, tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking. She reached for me, then pulled back as if afraid of crossing another invisible line. She begged me to stop. She asked me to think about the guests, about the embarrassment, about what people would say. She kept repeating that this was not the time, not the place, not in front of everyone. Inside the house, the voices of the Doyle family grew louder. I could hear Patrick asking someone if the venue was really canceled. Another voice asked about the date, the schedule, the deposits. The questions came fast now, practical and urgent, stripped of any concern for feelings or fairness. This was no longer about family. It was about damage control. I stood there, hands at my sides, my posture relaxed in a way that surprised even me. I did not explain myself. I did not justify my actions. I had learned long ago that explanations only gave people more angles to argue from. The truth did not need defending. Dad took a step closer to me. His finger pointed now, his jaw clenched tight. He told me I was making a scene. He told me this was not how families handled conflict. He told me I was acting out of spite. I met his eyes. I said quietly that I was acting out of self-respect. That only made him angrier. Mom's sobs grew louder. She asked me how I could do this to my own sister. She asked me if I understood what this would mean for Leela. She asked me if I could live with myself knowing I had ruined something so important. I felt the familiar tug in my chest, the instinct to comfort her, to smooth things over, to take the blame so the noise would stop. For a brief moment, I almost reached for her. Almost apologized. Almost folded back into the shape they expected. But then I remembered the room full of people who had watched Dad tell me I did not matter. I remembered the way no one had spoken up. I remembered how easy it had been for them to erase me. So I stayed still. Inside the house, the tension escalated. People moved quickly now. Phones pressed to ears, whispers turning into sharp exchanges. I heard someone say, "We need to fix this." Someone else said to call the venue again. Someone else said, "Athena cannot do this." That last sentence echoed strangely in my mind. Cannot, as if my role was still being negotiated. Lila appeared in the doorway then, her face pale, her eyes wide and frantic. She looked smaller somehow, younger, stripped of the confidence she had worn earlier in the evening. She stepped onto the porch, her fiancé close behind her, his expression tight with worry. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, not as her sister, but as an obstacle. "Athena," she said, her voice shaking, "what are you doing?" I did not answer right away. I wanted to give her the chance to say something else, to ask me how I was, to tell Dad to stop, to acknowledge what had just happened inside that house. She did not. Instead, she took a step closer, her hands trembling. She asked me what I planned to do next. That was the moment everything clicked into place. It was not anger that washed over me. It was understanding, clear and sharp and unmistakable. In that single question, I saw exactly where I stood. Lila was not afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing her wedding, afraid of the inconvenience, afraid of the disruption, afraid of the story changing in ways she could not control. I looked at her and felt something settle inside me, something final. I told her I had already done what I needed to do. She stared at me, disbelief flickering across her face. "You cannot just leave it like this," she said. "You have to fix it." I shook my head slowly. "I am not fixing anything tonight." Her fiancé shifted uncomfortably behind her. He asked, carefully, if there was any chance this could be resolved quietly, if we could talk privately, if maybe this had all been a misunderstanding. I did not respond to him. This was not his conversation to lead. David stepped in again, positioning himself slightly in front of Lila, as if to shield her. He told me I was being dramatic. He told me I was hurting people on purpose. He told me that whatever I thought I was proving, it was not worth the damage. I felt tired then. Not weak, just tired of carrying everyone else's fear on my back. I said I was leaving. Mom cried harder. She asked me where I thought I was going. She said we were family. She said we needed to talk this through. I told her we had talked enough. I walked down the steps of the porch slowly, feeling every movement, every breath. Behind me, the voices rose again, overlapping and urgent. Dad called my name. Mom called my name. Lila called my name. None of them called it with concern. I reached my car and unlocked it, the familiar sound grounding me. I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door, shutting out the noise completely. For a moment, I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Texts. Missed calls. Notifications stacking up faster than I could read them. I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat and started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of the house in my side mirror. Lights blazing. Shadows moving frantically behind the curtains. A family scrambling to regain control of a story that had slipped out of their hands. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel guilty. I felt clear. Driving through the quiet streets, I replayed Lila's question in my mind. What are you doing next? It struck me then how revealing it was. Not what you are feeling. Not okay. Just what comes next in the plan. That was when I accepted something I had been avoiding for years. My sister was afraid of losing her wedding. She was not afraid of losing me. And once I understood that, there was no unseeing it. That realization stayed with me long after the streetlights blurred past my windshield. I drove without a destination in mind, letting muscle memory guide me through familiar roads. My thoughts quieter now, heavier but more honest. The anger I expected never arrived. Instead, there was a deep sadness. Not sharp, not dramatic, just steady and undeniable. At a red light, I rested my forehead briefly against the steering wheel and closed my eyes. I pictured Lila as a little girl, trailing behind me at the park, asking me to push her higher on the swing. I remembered how fiercely I had protected her back then, how natural it had felt. Somewhere along the way, that loyalty had become one-sided, and I had been too busy being understanding to notice. My phone buzzed again, vibrating softly against the seat. I did not look. I already knew what it would be. Panic, dressed up as concern. Demands disguised as family duty. None of it would change what had been said, or what had not been said when it mattered most. When I finally pulled into an empty parking lot near the river, I turned off the engine and sat in the dark. The quiet wrapped around me, not threatening, but solid. For the first time that night, I let myself feel the full weight of it, the loss of an illusion. The end of hoping that silence could ever mean love. I realized then that whatever came next would be difficult, but it would be honest. And honesty, even when it hurts, is lighter to carry than pretending. I took a long breath, lifted my head, and sat there until my hands stopped shaking. The panic had burned itself out behind me. What remained was resolve, calm and unmovable, waiting for the next step. That next step arrived quietly, not with another confrontation, but with the steady vibration of my phone on the kitchen counter the following morning. I had barely slept. I moved through my apartment on autopilot, making coffee, opening the blinds, letting in a gray Ohio morning that matched how drained I felt. When I saw Dad's name light up the screen, something in me did not flinch the way it used to. I did not answer. The voicemail came first, then another call. Then a text. His messages shifted tone with every attempt. At first, he sounded firm, almost reasonable, telling me we needed to talk like adults. Then his words hardened. He said I had crossed a line. He said I was embarrassing the family. He said I was putting Lila in an impossible position. By late morning, the language changed again. He said I was going to regret this. He said lawyers were already being discussed. He said I had no legal standing to do what I had done. I read each message slowly, my coffee untouched beside me. What surprised me most was not the threat itself, but how familiar it felt. This was how control had always shown up in my life. Calm when I complied, harsh when I did not. Mom called next. Her voice was thin, exhausted, like she had been crying for hours. She asked me why I was doing this. She told me Dad was furious. She told me I did not understand how serious this could get. She said lawsuits destroy families, as if the family had not already decided where I ranked. I listened. I did not interrupt. When she finally paused, waiting for me to soften, I told her I understood exactly how serious it was. Then I told her I had already scheduled a meeting with a lawyer. There was silence on the line. Not relief, Not concerned, just shocked. Mom had never imagined I would take that step. Neither had Dad. Grant Holloway's office was downtown, in a building that smelled faintly of paper and polished wood, the kind of place that made things feel official the moment you walked in. Sitting in the waiting room, I felt a flicker of doubt for the first time. What if Dad was right? What if I had missed something? What if all those years of being told I was dramatic had finally made me reckless? Grant greeted me with a firm handshake and led me into his office. He asked me to start from the beginning, not the night of the confrontation, but years before. The engagement I had ended, the way my family responded, the wedding planning, the contracts, the phone calls. I talked for a long time. Grant listened without rushing me. He asked questions that made me think differently. Who signed the agreements? Who made the payments? Who was listed as the client? Each answer grounded me a little more. When I finished, he leaned back and took a breath. "Athena," he said, "you are legally protected here. The contracts are clear. You are the sole account holder. You exercised a right explicitly written into the agreement." I asked him to say it again, slower. He did. "No one can compel you to fund a private event. Being related does not create financial obligation. Being excluded strengthens your position, not weakens it." I felt something in my chest loosen, a pressure I had carried without naming. He told me to keep everything in writing, to stop engaging emotionally, to let him handle any further threats if they escalated. He told me that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Walking out of his office, I realized how rare it was for someone to look at my situation without bias, without family history, without expectations, just facts. That afternoon, the confirmations started arriving. Nora Feldman emailed first. Professional, polite, clear. All planning services under my name had been formally suspended. No further coordination would take place without my authorization. Rachel Boone followed. Riverside Hall acknowledged the pause. No remaining balance would be processed. The venue was marked pending until further notice. I read each email twice, then once more, letting the words sink in. There was something deeply validating about seeing it in writing. Not opinions, not feelings, confirmation. I forwarded everything to Dad. His reply came quickly, angry and dismissive. He accused me of hiding behind paperwork. He said legal tricks did not change the fact that I was hurting my own family. He said this was not over, but the threats had lost their weight. 2 days later, Dad showed up at my apartment unannounced. He stood outside my door like he still had authority there. When I opened it, his expression was rigid, controlled, but his eyes betrayed uncertainty. He told me he had spoken to someone. He said I was skating on thin ice. He said judges do not look kindly on people who sabotage family events. I listened. Then I told him I had spoken to my lawyer. That was when his confidence cracked. He asked who the lawyer was. He asked what exactly had been said. He asked if I was sure. The questions came fast, urgent, stripped of certainty. I told him the truth, that legally there was nothing he could do, that I had acted within my rights, that if he continued threatening me, my lawyer would respond formally. For the first time in my life, Dad did not argue back. He stood there, silent, searching my face for the version of me who would eventually back down. She did not appear. He left without another word. That night, I sat on my couch with my phone face down beside me, the apartment quiet around me. I reread the emails again, not because I needed reassurance, but because I wanted to remember this feeling. For the first time, the truth did not depend on who spoke the loudest. For the first time, authority did not belong to the person who intimidated best. For the first time, I was not wrong simply because someone older said I was. The law did not care about Dad's disappointment. The contracts did not recognize guilt. The facts stood where my family had not. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let that realization settle into me. Whatever emotional fallout was still coming, this part was finished. For the first time in my life, the truth had my back. That quiet certainty followed me into the next few days, even as everything else grew louder. The family group chat exploded less than an hour after Dad left my apartment. My phone lit up again and again on the coffee table, the screen flashing with names and notifications I did not open right away. I already knew the tone before I read a single word. I had grown up fluent in it. When I finally picked up the phone that evening, I scrolled slowly, letting the messages reveal themselves in order. The first ones came from relatives who had been in the room that night. Short, sharp sentences. Confused, but accusatory. People asking what I thought I was doing. People saying this had gone too far. Someone wrote that family problems should stay private. Someone else said I had humiliated Dad in front of everyone. Then the messages shifted from confusion to judgment. An aunt said I was being selfish. A cousin said I was holding the wedding hostage. Someone wrote that I was punishing Leela for mistakes that were already in the blend. Past. The words stacked on top of each other, forming a familiar story. Not what happened. Not what was said to me, just how inconvenient my reaction had been. I noticed something then that made my chest tighten. Not a single message asked how I was doing. Not one person said they were sorry for what Dad had said. No one questioned whether excluding me had been wrong. The focus was unanimous and immediate. Fix this. Make it stop. Put things back the way they were so everyone else could breathe again. I kept scrolling. Leela finally spoke in the chat hours later. Her message was long and emotional, full of exclamation points and frustration. She wrote that she was devastated, that she felt betrayed, that she never asked me to do this, that I had ruined what was supposed to be the happiest time of her life. Reading her words hurt in a quiet, dull way, not because she was angry, but because she never once acknowledged why this had happened. There was no mention of Dad's announcement. No recognition of the humiliation, just loss, framed entirely as hers. Dad sent a message shortly after. It was brief. He said he was disappointed in me. He said he expected better. He said that if I truly cared about family, I would reverse my decision and stop creating division. I stared at his message for a long time. I did not reply. The next day, the private messages began. They came in quietly, one by one, separate from the group chat. An older cousin I had always liked told me she understood why I was hurt. She said she had wanted to say something that night, but froze. Another relative wrote that Dad had gone too far, but that confronting him would have caused chaos. Someone else admitted that they had always thought I was treated unfairly, but that it was easier to stay out of it. Each message followed the same pattern. Sympathy paired with distance. Understanding paired with inaction. I read them all carefully. I did not respond to any of them. What struck me most was how relieved they sounded to be speaking privately, as if acknowledging the truth out loud, even in a text, was a risk they needed to manage carefully. Their honesty had limits. Their support came with conditions. By the third day, the group chat had turned ugly. Words like dramatic and vindictive appeared. Someone suggested I enjoyed playing the victim. Someone else implied that I was using money to control people. I set the phone down and walked away from it. When I came back later that night, there was a new message from Mom, sent directly to me. It was short. She wrote that I did not need to win like this. I was supposed to gracefully lose for the sake of peace. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in my hands, and let myself feel it fully. That message clarified something I had never been able to put into words before. My family was not looking for fairness. They were not interested in truth or accountability or repair. They wanted quiet. They wanted the appearance of harmony, even if it required someone else to swallow the damage. They wanted me to make myself small again so everything could go back to normal. I realized then how often I had done exactly that, uncomfortable. How many times I had been praised for being mature, understanding, and easy. This time, I did nothing. I did not defend myself. I did not correct the narrative. Silence was no longer something that worked against me. This time, it worked for me. I muted the group chat. The phone felt lighter in my hand once the noise stopped. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the difference between peace and silence, about how often those two things are confused, especially in families that fear conflict more than harm. I understood then that what they wanted was not resolution. It was a restoration of comfort, and for the first time, I knew I was not willing to pay that price anymore. I set my phone on the nightstand, turned off the light, and let the quiet settle around me, steady and honest. Know that whatever came next would have to exist without my compliance. Sleep did not come easily that night. My mind kept replaying fragments of messages, not the harsh ones, but the softer ones. The ones that said, "I understand, but." The ones that said, "You are right, but please do not involve me." Those words lingered longer than the accusations because they revealed something deeper. They showed me how many people had seen the imbalance all along and chosen comfort over courage. Sometime after midnight, I reached for my phone again. Not to respond, but to reread. I wanted to be sure I was not imagining it, that I was not twisting their words to justify my distance. But the pattern was unmistakable. Every message circled back to the same expectation, that I should absorb the damage quietly so everyone else could move on, untouched. The next morning, I woke to more notifications. I did not rush to check them. I showered, got dressed, and made breakfast. Simple routines that grounded me in the present. When I finally opened the group chat again, the tone had shifted once more. Now there were attempts at compromise. Suggestions that maybe Dad had spoken too harshly but meant well. Maybe I could attend the wedding after all if I apologized. Maybe we could forget the money part and focus on family. Reading those messages, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, but clarity. They were willing to rewrite the past as long as it meant they did not have to confront it. Dad's words were being softened. My reaction was being reframed as excessive. The original harm was slowly being erased in favor of a version of events that felt easier to digest. I realized then how often truth becomes negotiable when it threatens the structure people rely on. Another private message came in from someone I had always respected. She wrote that she admired my strength, that she wished she had done something similar years ago. Then she added that she hoped I would eventually make peace, because holding on to resentment only hurts yourself. I closed my eyes and took a breath. It was not resentment I was holding. It was a memory. I was not angry because I enjoyed it. I was clear because I finally allowed myself to remember without editing, to remember how it felt to be blamed for being betrayed, to be labeled a problem for refusing to tolerate disrespect, to be excluded and then criticized for not accepting it gracefully. That afternoon, Mom tried calling again. I let it ring. Not because I hated her, but because I knew the conversation would not be about me. It would be about smoothing things over, about convincing me to bend just enough so the tension would ease. I was tired of bending. Later, I went for a long walk through my neighborhood. The air was crisp, the kind that makes you feel awake in your bones. As I walked, I thought about how often women are taught that peacekeeping is a virtue, even when it comes at the cost of self-respect. How silence is praised as maturity. How endurance is mistaken for love. I stopped by the river and stood there for a while, watching the water move steadily forward, unbothered by the noise behind it. It struck me how natural it felt. Movement without apology, direction without explanation. When I returned home, my phone was quiet. The group chat had slowed. People had said what they needed to say. The storm had burned itself out. I did not feel the urge to respond. That was the moment I understood something fundamental about my family. They were not asking me to heal. They were asking me to disappear just enough to restore their comfort. And this time, I chose not to. I placed my phone face down on the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and stood there in the quiet of my own space. There was sadness in that realization, yes, but also relief. Because once you see the pattern clearly, you stop questioning your own reaction to it. I was not trying to win. I was trying to stop losing myself. As the evening settled in, I felt a calm resolve take hold. The noise would return. The pressure would come back in new forms, but I knew now what I was unwilling to trade away. My silence no longer surrendered. The wedding still happened. I found that out the way most things seem to happen now. Quietly, through a notification I did not rush to open. A message from an aunt I had not heard from in weeks. She wrote that the date had stayed the same. The location had changed. Everything had been scaled down. She added a heart emoji, then deleted it. Then sent a new message that simply said, "Hope you are doing okay." I read it once and set my phone down. In the days leading up to it, I had imagined the wedding as a looming event, something heavy and unavoidable. I had thought it would feel like a countdown, each hour bringing a new wave of regret or grief. Instead, The days passed with surprising calm. I went to work. I answered emails. I cooked dinner. I slept through the night. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up early without meaning to. The light through the window was soft and pale. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the quiet of my apartment. No rushing, no schedule, no obligation to be anywhere but where I was. I made coffee and stood by the window while it brewed, watching a neighbor walk her dog down the sidewalk. It felt like any other Saturday. That realization settled gently, without drama. Later that morning, my phone buzzed. A group message from relatives who were already there. Someone said traffic was bad. Someone else complained about the weather. Someone asked if anyone had seen the florist yet. I muted the thread without opening it fully. I did not feel angry. I did not feel left out. I felt removed. Around midday, a photo came through from a cousin. It showed a small ceremony space, chairs arranged closely together. A simple arch, nothing extravagant. I noticed the absence of details I had once carefully selected. The upgraded seating, the customized lighting, the elements that had taken weeks of planning and coordination. I studied the photo for a few seconds, then locked my phone. I expected to feel something sharp then, a twist of pain, a sudden longing to be there, even after everything. Instead, what I felt was distance, like looking at a place I used to live in, recognizing it without missing it. That afternoon, I ran errands. I picked up groceries. I stopped at the hardware store for light bulbs, ordinary things, grounding things. At one point, while standing in line, I realized how strange it was that I was not thinking about the ceremony at all. Not the vows, not the walk down the aisle, not whether Leela was happy. It was not that I did not care about her. It was that I had stopped measuring my worth by my presence. In the late afternoon, another photo arrived. Lila in her dress, smiling, but tense, her shoulders raised slightly, the way they do when she is overwhelmed. Dad stood beside her in one shot, his expression stiff, performative. Mom was not smiling at all. I looked at the images without zooming in, without replaying them, without searching for myself in the margins. I did not respond. The ceremony happened somewhere I was not, at a time I did not mark. I imagine there were words spoken about love and commitment and family. I imagine people clapped. I imagine the cake was cut. I imagine laughter that sounded a little forced. None of it reached me. That evening, I cooked dinner for myself. Something simple. Pasta with olive oil and garlic. I ate at the counter, scrolling through a book recommendation on my tablet. The sun dipped lower outside the window, painting the room in warm light. At some point, I realized the wedding must be over. The thought came and went without fanfare. A message arrived later from Mom. She wrote that everything had gone well. She said Leela was beautiful. She said it was a shame things had turned out the way they did. She did not ask how I was. I read the message once and set the phone aside. I did not cry that night. I did not pace the apartment or replay conversations. I did not imagine myself there, standing at the edge of the room, smiling politely, pretending nothing had happened. I went to bed early. As I lay there in the dark, I thought about how many years I had believed that being excluded would break me. That missing a milestone would leave a permanent wound, that not showing up would somehow erase my place in the family. What I learned instead was quieter and more profound. The pain I had feared belonged to a version of myself who still believed sacrifice would be rewarded. That version of me had already left. The next morning, I woke up to a few more photos, a group shot, a table with simple centerpieces, a cake that looked hastily chosen. I scrolled past them without stopping. I noticed something else then. There was no ache in my chest, no sinking feeling, no regret. Just space. I went for a walk that morning, the air cool and clear. As I moved through the neighborhood, I thought about the role I had played for most of my life, the one who adjusted, the one who covered gaps, the one who paid, emotionally and otherwise, so things could move forward smoothly. That role no longer fits. Standing at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change, I felt a sense of completion I had not expected. Not closure in the dramatic sense, just an understanding that something had ended naturally, without needing my permission. I crossed the street and kept walking, my steps light, my thoughts steady. By the time I returned home, the wedding felt distant, already part of the past. Not something I had lost, but something I had stepped away from. And in that quiet realization, I understood that I was no longer the person who had to sacrifice herself to keep everyone else comfortable. That chapter of my life had closed, gently but firmly, and I did not feel the need to reopen it. Months passed after the wedding, slipping by without ceremony. No dramatic fallout, no grand apologies, just distance settling in, layer by layer, like dust after a storm. At first, I kept waiting for something. A call from Dad, admitting he had gone too far. A message from Mom, acknowledging the hurt. A longer note from Lila that went beyond polite phrases and surface-level concern. None of it came. Dad did not reach out again. Not once. No explanation. No apology. No attempt to reframe or justify what he had said that night. He chose silence the way he always had, when faced with something that challenged his authority. Pretend it never happened. Move forward. Let time do the erasing. Mom called occasionally. Her voice was careful, measured, as if we were acquaintances navigating polite conversation instead of a mother and daughter, carrying years of unspoken history. She asked about my job, commented on the weather, mentioned a recipe she had tried. She never brought up the wedding. She never asked how that night had affected me. It was as if the subject itself was too dangerous to touch, like acknowledging it might crack something she was not ready to face. Lila sent a message once, a few weeks after the wedding. She wrote that married life was busy, that she hoped I was doing well, that she missed how things used to be. I read it slowly, noticing what was absent. No accountability, no recognition of what had happened. No curiosity about my feeling, just nostalgia for a version of our relationship that required me to stay, quiet and accommodating. I did not reply. And what surprised me was how natural that felt. I did not feel cruel. I did not feel guilty. I felt aligned. For years, I had believed that maintaining connection required constant effort on my part. That distance was something to fear. That silence meant abandonment. But now, silence felt different. It felt like space, like room to breathe. Without the constant tension of anticipating the next family interaction, my days settled into a calmer rhythm. I woke up without that familiar knot in my stomach. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. I stopped bracing myself for subtle criticism or disappointment disguised as concern. I focused on my work, on routines that grounded me, on relationships that did not require explanation or apology. I spent time with friends who listened without trying to fix me, who did not ask me to soften my edges or dim my clarity for the sake of harmony. And slowly, I began to understand something important. What I had done was not an act of revenge. It was an act of refusal. People sometimes assume that pulling financial support was about punishment, that I wanted to hurt my family the way I had been hurt, that I wanted to teach them a lesson. That was never my motivation. I did not take the money back to make anyone suffer. I took it back because I refused to be humiliated with my own generosity, because I refused to bankroll an event where my presence was treated as unnecessary, because I refused to fund my own exclusion and then be told I was dramatic for objecting to it. That distinction matters. For so long, my contributions had been welcomed only as long as they came without boundaries. My support was valued, but my voice was not. My presence was optional, but my resources were expected. That imbalance had existed for years, and I had participated in it because I believed love meant endurance. That night, standing in that crowded room, something fundamental shifted. I think back to that moment often. The way the room went silent after I spoke. The way faces froze, not in concern, but in shock. Not because they suddenly understood my pain, but because the narrative they were comfortable with had been interrupted. I remember how my heart raced, how my body felt both exposed and grounded at the same time. I remember the clarity that cut through the noise like a clean line, the understanding that I would never again explain my worth to people who benefited from denying it. When I recall that moment now, it no longer hurts. It feels clean. What I took back that night was not just money. It was consent. Consent to be treated as expendable. Consent to be the one who absorbs discomfort, so others can remain comfortable. Consent to disappear quietly when my presence challenged the story. I stopped giving that consent. And with that decision came something unexpected. Freedom. Not the loud, celebratory kind. Not the kind that demands applause, but the quiet freedom of alignment, of knowing that my actions matched my values, of no longer negotiating my dignity for the sake of belonging. I no longer tried to earn acceptance by shrinking myself. I no longer apologized for setting boundaries. I no longer confused peace with silence. The distance that followed was not punishment. It was information. It showed me who valued comfort over fairness, who preferred smooth surfaces over honest conversation, who only felt safe when I stayed within the role they assigned me. And it showed me who I had become. Someone who could sit with discomfort without rushing to fix it. Someone who could allow relationships to change without chasing after their old shape. Someone who understood that integrity sometimes costs you proximity to people you once thought would always be there. I do not know what the future holds for my family. Maybe time will soften things. Maybe it will not. I am no longer waiting for resolution to begin living fully. What I know is this: I am no longer the person who disappears to keep everyone else comfortable. I am no longer willing to trade my self-respect for conditional love. And I am no longer afraid of silence. Because silence, when chosen, is not absence. It is power. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.